Hey guys, so we are going to go ahead and actually continue lesson 113, and we are going to talk about domain and range a little bit more. This time we're going to introduce a few new things about domain and range. So today we're going to go over what we've already talked about regarding domain and range, and also learn about these closed and open points. Okay, in case you are a little rusty about domain and range, I have provided you with this table. Here it tells you about some characteristics of domain, and then here it tells you about some characteristics about range. So remember, domain has to do with the inputs. It's all the x values. So remember, that's the one that goes left to right. Okay. Range is talking about outputs, y values, and low to high. All right. So let's take a look at these graphs. This looks a little different from what we're used to, right? This time we are lacking those arrows that we kept putting on in the last time that we talked about domain and range. So let's figure out what this means. What we have here is kind of a parabola, right? But this time it's been limited to what we can use here. So if we look at our domain, we notice that the farthest left this is going to go is going to be right here at -2, okay? And then the farthest right it's ever going to go is right here at 3. Okay, so we know that my domain is going to go from -2 to 3. Now here's the thing that changes, okay? If you look at this point at -2, all right, it's actually a closed dot. And what that means is that that is a real point on the graph. We want to use it. And so as we're used to, we will put a bracket, okay? But this time, for this point on the right at 3, notice how it's an open circle, okay? If you notice an open circle dot, that means we do not include that value in our graph, okay? And when we don't include the value in our graph, that means we need to put a parenthesis, just like we do for infinity, okay? So when you have an open circle, you don't include, and that's when you use parentheses, okay? And so the inequality notation doesn't really change, right? That's still what we're used to. So we start with the smallest, less than. Now, because we used a bracket with -2, we need the equal to bar, x less than 3. Okay, notice how we did not put the equal to bar with the 3 because we used a parenthesis. Okay, and that's the focus of today is what do we do when we have an open dot, okay? And that means we use a parenthesis and no equal to bar. Okay, let's try this one. For range, let's switch our color here. Remember, range is talking about high to low, or sorry, low to high. So the lowest point of our graph is this guy right over here. That brings us to -5. And the highest point of our graph is up here at 4. So we know our range goes -5 to 4. Now again, -5 is coming from an open circle point, just like the 3 for the domain. So we're going to keep a parenthesis with -5. And 4, there's no open circle there. So if you're just using a number and there's no open circle, you can assume it's a bracket. We want to include that point. Okay, and then for the inequality, again, use the same numbers from your interval notation. But remember, no equal to bar because I'm using a parenthesis. Because we're talking about range, we're going to use a y. And this time, because there's a bracket by the 4, we need the equal to bar. All right. So that's all for that graph. The only new thing, and I would take note of this in your notes, and if you get confused, ask me on Zoom. But if we have a closed circle, Jeez. All right, if we have a closed circle or a closed dot, okay, then we use our brackets and we use these guys. All right, if we have open dot, then we use parentheses and we don't use the equal to bar. So just like that. And I guess I could put for reference, this is a closed dot, this is an open dot. I would really note that down in your notebooks. All right, so then let's do one here. Now this is a normal domain and range graph like we've been used to, right? If there's no funky dots anywhere, you can assume arrows. So for domain, the farthest left my graph is ever gonna go, and remember for domain, we could just pretend like this axis doesn't exist. We wanna focus on x values only. So our graph is going on forever and ever in the left direction. So I know it's going to go towards negative infinity. Remember, left indicates negative because that's where the negative numbers are. Okay, and on the right, similarly, it's also going on forever. So my domain on the right side will go to infinity, and we never use brackets with infinity. All right, and then for my inequality notation, smallest less than x less than biggest. All right, and then for range, now we're looking at the vertical axis. So I can go ahead this time and ignore the x-axis, ignore all these numbers. Okay, now we're looking low to high. Now this graph is obviously going down forever and ever. Okay, so the lowest it gets is really just going to be negative infinity because it doesn't stop. And the highest, it stops at 4. Okay, that is the highest our graph ever goes. It doesn't pass that at all. So we're going to put a 4. And now the infinity gets a parenthesis. The 4 gets a bracket because it's a valid point on the graph. There's no open circle there. Okay, and then for inequality notation, same idea, just this time you use a y instead of an x because we're talking about range. And then don't forget that if we used a bracket, we need the equal to bar. All right, and that is all for today with domain and range.